Welcome to the Toproxy Method, creating confident learners. The Toproxy Method uses a unique combination of breath work, brain-body work, gratitude, and a clay-based program to affect the neuroplasticity of the brain in students, to help strengthen their mind-body connection, help them develop a growth mindset, and most importantly, trust and confidence in themselves. Aloha and welcome to another episode of the Toproxy Method, creating confident learners. I'm Tani Toproxy, the founder and creator. If you've just found me, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. In the last 4 episodes, I've been talking a lot about this free reading assessment video that I've created, and I touch a lot on the idea of visual versus phonetic learners. So in this episode, we'll look at what all that means and why it's important to know. So let's get started. So I've been talking a lot about this idea of visual versus phonetic learners. So what the heck does that even mean? So visual learners, they tend to think in pictures or 3D versus a phonetic learner who is thinking more in sounds. Again, we are all in a gamut. So we all think in both, but it's to what degree. And so visual learners tend to heavily process information in the visual, in the 3D, without phonetics, without sound. So I've created an 8-minute long video, and this video walks you step by step through a process that just understands how your child is processing information, especially for reading. And it's the process that I do when I first meet a student and I'm trying to understand how they think. It's my own informal assessment to understand what's going on. I do a few things to understand the core subjects, right? So reading, math, writing, and spelling, just to see what's going on before I even start working with a student. So why is this so important to know? I had one student, he was a gifted first grader. He could tell you about so many things, sophisticated thinking, insights, and so forth around the world around him. He had so much knowledge, but when it came to reading a simple sentence across 2 pages, like a picture book or a level 1 book, he would throw a fit because he didn't have the tools to read it. And how he was being taught wasn't working for him. So once I started teaching him visually, creating a huge bank of high frequency words, working with clay for word mastery and symbol mastery, he went from screaming about reading 1 sentence across 2 pages to literally eating chapter books. And I'm talking chapter books like Gordon Corman, Lute, these really deeper books, a couple years later. And when I asked him about it, he doesn't even remember struggling. It's not in his body. It's not part of him. He's a reader. Reading is easy, but he needed different tools than the phonetic-based tools that are commonly taught when reading. So once we started doing it visually based, high frequency word study, clay-based stuff, he started to read with fluency. And again, it's not even part of who he is. So this 8-minute video that I've been talking a lot about lately, it's part of what I do when I first meet a student. So in the first hour and a half or so, I'll always start with a mini interview because I'm curious about who they are, what they like to do outside of school, what things they like, what things they don't, because I can always teach from a place of connection if I know a little bit more about them. And then, of course, I ask them about school, what's easy, what's hard, what they perceive is easy, what's hard, what they perceive what they like and what they don't like, right? There's a difference between I can be good at something, but do I like it as well? So I'm always interested in just kind of their perspective and lens. And then I always share my favorite Gandhi quote, and I'll share it again here. I shared it in the first episode, but men often become what they believe themselves to be. If I believe I cannot do something, it makes me incapable of doing it. But when I believe I can, then I acquire the ability to do it, even if I didn't have it in the beginning. And I love this quote. It's pretty much the foundation of academics. If I don't have the ability yet, but I know that I'm going to learn it, we will get there. And we have a little discussion about that and so forth. After that, I usually teach them about an energy dial just so that they can monitor their own focus and their own body. I check in with orientation and balance work, and then I start to teach them about 3 grateful things and the breath work that we're going to do. And then comes this reading assessment that this video is about, and I'll play a math game to understand their number sense. And again, you can access all the information about this video at the end of this episode. A little bit deeper, what does it mean to be visual, and what does it mean to be phonetic? Like I said, we both process information in both, but just at different degrees. Visual learners are the ones who are thinking so fast that sometimes they don't know how they got the answer, right? We see this in math and other subjects, especially with computers or artists or people who download a whole story in one sitting. They usually it's a little deeper than a photographic memory, and things just come easily. But the thing that doesn't come easily is often the phonetics or sounds, right? So when we have a phonetic learner, they have an internal dialogue that as they're reading, as they're thinking, and they're consciously hearing this pattern. So, we have a different degree, but the heavily visual 3D picture, there's a disconnect with how reading is taught with phonetics. Oftentimes, they can't even hear the sounds at first. So if your child is heavily visual, I would recommend checking in with the short sounds A, E, I, O, U. Those are the long sounds of the vowels, right? But a, right? A for apple, or A for apple, E for elephant, I for igloo, A for octopus, and for umbrella. And it's almost like a daily check-in. Do you know these sounds? A, I, and a lot of visual learners really struggle with it. It's not in them. And they have to be explicitly taught vowel patterns and rules and so forth. But usually I teach them through visual base, so spelling, sweeping, word mastery, clay, word study, and building a huge bank of vocabulary and high frequency words. Because think about it, when you see your name, so when I see Tawny, I don't go Tawny, right? I don't sound it out. I know it. It's in my brain. It's in my body, Tawny, every time I see it. So we can learn to read visually without even having to do the phonetics. What's interesting is the phonetics do come on the back end, and they start to make the connection kind of through the back door, if that makes sense. But typically the letter sounds, and especially the vowel sounds, they're not hearing them, right? And this is the typical dyslexic thinking as well. But what's interesting is when you teach all students to visually read, have a huge high frequency word bank, having word study with vowel patterns, and going over the rules and teaching them to spell read and also sweep read, that actually benefits all learners, which is pretty cool. So no one gets left behind. But we can teach them to read through a picture versus sound. Oftentimes, people think that reading is quote unquote sounding out words. That's a part of it, and that is part of fluency if that's how you learn. But there's also the reading strategies, right? Reading is thinking. How do you make predictions? How do you evaluate? How do you make connections to the world at large, other text, to your own life, to the character? Those are all part of reading. And again, when we know a word, we don't sound it out, right? You see your name and you just say it. Typically, a student needs 10,000 plus words at sight to read fluently. It's the same with foreign languages. They say that you need about 300 words to become conversational in any language, and then you can just have a conversation. So having a huge bank within the brain that you're not phonetically sounding out will make you a fluent reader as well. So that's how we get to those visual learners. I have a theory that students have to hear, use, see, write, and read a word at least 10 times before they even know what it is. And this is expansion, not of just reading, but also vocabulary. And sometimes they need more than that 10 time or 10. In the video that I've been referring to, I walk you through finding out what type of learner your child is, right? Visual or phonetic, and also if they have any trigger words of their own and how to watch out for them outside of this reading assessment, how to find it in their reading, their homework, their writing, and so forth. There are about 219 trigger words, and kids who are more visual based have about 10 to 50 of their own that will trip them up. And when we start to fill in those 10 to 50 words of their own, the reading process becomes smooth. I have another student who was not identified as a reader. She would often give even her restaurant menus to her parents to read for her, even as late as middle school. And once we started to work together, doing her trigger words through clay, visual based reading strategies, reading out loud together, learning how to process, she started to keep track of reading. Actually, this was a pretty quick turnaround. Even within 3 days of meeting her, she had finished her first chapter book. This was a huge deal. It wasn't a big chapter book, but the deal of like, now I am a reader and I'm going to keep track of everything I'm doing this year was benchmark or mile marker, right? And as soon as she started to identify, I can do this, then she did more of it. Why is it so important to know whether your child is a visual or phonetic learner? It's important because in school, we typically teach students how to read phonetically without these other visual based tools. But what happens when you start to teach a child who is visual versus phonetic through visual based tools, we can actually fix the problem permanently. Phonetics comes through the back end. They're able to read fluently. There's no problem. There's no discrepancy through the pace of the class. The sooner we know this about them, the better, because rather than waiting later and waiting and seeing what's going to happen and their trigger words and their, pace of fluency is falling behind their peers, we can affect this and fix it before it becomes a real issue, right? There is some level of effort and brain work needed when a student is learning how to read, right? We think about kindergarten, first, even second grade. We have to teach kids the discipline, the perseverance, the ability to stick to something and get through the material, right? The brain is literally learning something new synaptic connections. So that is a part. So it's okay for them to struggle, right? They're going to have to. No one can do the brain work for them. And we have to teach kids how to stick to something through consistency, through perseverance. As an academic skill, right? I actually think perseverance is an underrated academic skill. Sticking to something that is hard. Maybe I have to pause for today, but I'm going to come back and visit tomorrow and the next day and the next day until it is a mastered skill. To go back to this child, she was in middle school and she wasn't reading books, and we addressed all her trigger words. There were about 50 of them. So it was on the bigger, the heavier side of a student having trigger words. But then once we did this, once we took the time, and again, it's not a fast process, it's a slow process, reading became easy and fluent. And she transitioned from I don't read to I am a reader. And when she transitioned into high school later on, there was her reading was so smooth that there was no disconnect from homeschool back into the school system. I have another student currently, he has all his sight words solo, but he is switching them up in reading. So there's a disconnect with I know the words, but then in context or reading them in full sentences where my brain attention is heavier, it's still a problem. So we're having to go back and apply all the visual based tools so that he can read it fluently in the context of sentences versus just high frequency words. So, and when I talk about high frequency words, I'm not talking about sight words. I'm talking about their high frequency words. What words are important to them, and how do we build up that 10,000 plus bank of words so that they are reading fluently and not having to sound out stuff as well. So, like I said, there's a big disconnect on how reading is taught into the classroom. The ironic thing is, with these tools to spell read, clay mastery, letter recognition, high frequency words, and word study were taught, all learners, whether they're visual or phonetic, would actually benefit because it makes it a smoother transition for all. Versus when we teach just phonetically, the visual learners get left behind. So we need to give those students who are heavily visual based other tools like sight or sweep reading, spelling, clay for word mastery and letter mastery, and also tracking. A lot of times I'm noticing that their letters out of order are mixed up, or they don't know, like they'll switch a G for a J, a B for a D. We hear that one often, but also other ones like W with U. And just depending on how the student has learned it, we have to give them their own high frequency word set that gets mastered and revisited until it's in their body. And also reading out loud until they've mastered it internally. I actually read 20 to 40 minutes out loud with students all the way through high school because there's ample time and room to teach other reading skills and strategies, right? The predictions, the connections, the inferences, to model thinking. It helps speed up their internal reading process. It makes them stronger readers. And I can pick up where their trigger words are and what vocabulary words they're missing and what word patterns they're struggling with and so forth, all by hearing them read out loud. And again, this works for all learners, whether they're visual or phonetic. So in the outro, you'll get all the information on how to get access to this free reading assessment video. And in it, you'll assess what type of reader your child is. Again, we're always both to some degree. I'll walk you through the process of identifying trigger words and give you some tangible tips on how to move forward to help your child succeed and read more fluently. Thanks so much for listening. Before I go, I wanted to share that I have a free assessment video that I'd love to share with you where I walk you through a simple process in reading to figure out what type of learner your child is. I use this with every student when I first meet them to give me a sense of whether they're more of a visual or phonetic learner. This is so important to know because it will help you use the right tools to avoid bigger issues. To receive this free gift, sign up for my newsletter at pages.tawnytutors.com/newsletter. As soon as you sign up, you'll receive it in your inbox. If you're interested, follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the Taproxy Method. I also take on a very few select private one-on-one clients worldwide for homeschool support and tutoring work. Email me at tawny.taproxy@tawnytutors.com. Have a blessed day and aloha.